What's up, everybody? Welcome back to a very special episode of Speaking Llama, a Survivor podcast where we are here to talk about arguably my two favorite things in the world, Survivor and board games. And more importantly, we are joined by a very special guest with us today, Jamey Stegmaier of Stonemaier Games, publisher of great games like Viticulture, Wingspan, Scythe. Maybe you've played them, maybe you haven't. But if you haven't, you definitely should check it out. Jamey, how are you doing this morning?
I'm excited to be here. Survivor and board games are two of my favorite topics too, and I figure there's some overlap between the audiences here. And yeah, I'm really excited to talk about Survivor today and talk about games as they relate to Survivor.
Absolutely. I was telling Alex that I do think the cross section of people who love board games and people who love Survivor are probably pretty big out there, and so I've really wanted to kind of dive into this and the topic about Survivor and board games and kind of the overlap. But tell us a little bit about yourself, about your history with Survivor.
Yeah. So I started watching Survivor when the first season came out, and I think it was the summer of, was it 99 or 2000? Long time ago. Yeah, I think it was the summer after I first went to college. I came back to town. I remember watching the finale in a room filled with like 30, 40 people. It was a giant gathering of people just sitting around watching the finale. And I've watched every season since then, except for one or two when I was studying abroad in Japan. I couldn't get those seasons. And someday I just need to go back and watch them. But I kind of know what happened in those seasons now, so I haven't rewatched them or tried to watch them. But yeah, I've loved it. For many years, I would get together with friends and watch Survivor. Now it's mostly just me and Megan watching it, and then sometimes listening to podcasts like yours and giving that sense of community by hearing what other people think about it. But I love the show and I love talking about it. So I'm really excited to talk about it with you two today.
That's great. Do you have any favorite players or seasons in particular that kind of stand out to you?
Yeah, I was thinking about my favorite players. You two are amazing. I've listened to only a few episodes of your podcast so far, but I need to go back and listen to some of the older ones. But your memories in terms of how you remember like what happened in certain seasons and names of people is incredible. I don't have that level of memory, but I did think about this question in advance. Some of my favorites are people who are really good at challenges, or I think are fun to watch, like Ozzy and Jonathan. Jonathan more recent than Ozzy. Carson really impressed me last season with his ability to prepare in advance for many of these challenges. I hadn't seen a survivor do it to that level before. Cochran, I just really like Cochran's how nerdy he was. I got to meet Cochran in person and asked him if he played games, and he was like, no, I look like someone who would play games, but I don't. And Tyson, I like funny contestants, so I like guys like Tyson who are really humorous. Parvati, I thought, used some really interesting strategies that I haven't seen other players use. And Rick Devens, I really like Rick, and I like that he's on the Jeff's podcast now as one of the co-hosts. Yeah, those are some of my favorites from past seasons.
Yeah,
incredible.
Those are all great. I appreciate the listen to the podcast. I also am impressed with our Survivor knowledge at times, though I do wonder what I could be using my memory for, but unfortunately it's Survivor.
For me, that's like game rules. I have thousands of game rules in my head that could be occupied by other information, but yeah.
But nonetheless, we're here. We're doing those things.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
You also asked about favorite oh, go ahead, Alex.
No, yeah. you got it. You got it.
So favorite seasons, again, I don't have the best memory for this. Many of my memories for past seasons are like specific moments from those seasons. And I would say fairly recently, I think there have been some really emotional tribal councils in various seasons, whether it's tied to, I think maybe the first one that comes to mind is the one where someone was outed as a transgender person at tribal, really emotional tribal council. There was another one. There are a few that have been tied to kind of racial relations and inclusivity, and I thought those were really powerful. As a favorite season, though, I think it was either 38 or 39 that I had the opportunity to go to the final show, or like the final episode, or they do the live, the live reveal. I think it was 38 or 39. It was the one where Rick Devens was on the season. Yeah. And so that one is very memorable to me because I never imagined that I could actually go to the finale, and I got to go to it. So that was one of my favorites. That's one where Chris came back from exile and ended up winning the season.
Yeah, that's a good season. That's a season. Caleb and I, we watch quite a bit and we play board games together. We often say Rick Devens is kind of the Caleb, he's like that, even in board games, comes across, people think he's a big threat, and I kind of sneak in like Chris at the very end and beat Caleb every time. So that's that's a good season.
Have either of you, I know I should probably know this, but have either of you ever attended one of those finales, the live finales? No.
Unfortunately not. No, we've had a few watch parties. We're both here in Texas, and so there's been a few watch parties kind of the last year or so that we've been able to go to and meet some former players there. But unfortunately, we're hoping those live finales come back so we can go.
Yeah, that was a fun era when they used to do that. Although I do also like that they get to talk about it now in the moment when it's very fresh in their minds at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. We have gotten the chance to know Cassidy from season 43 because she's from the Austin area, and so it's been fun to hear their perspectives too on like that experience of the immediacy of right after voting. But yeah, so thanks for sharing some of that. We obviously love Survivor, and a lot of us have many different reasons for doing so. But like, what is it about Survivor that keeps you coming back for more and more?
Yeah, I've been trying to think about this because I'm hooked on it. Like I don't ever even consider not watching a new season now. But I think one of the reasons I've stayed with it over the years, and that I was entranced by it originally, is just the original concept of having people on an island trying to survive. That combined with the variety of challenges that they offer, like just the social game tied to the physical games, tied to the mental games. It's the combination of all three that really hooks me. There are many other shows, that have like maybe one or even two of those aspects, but Survivor combines all three so well. And I think they just seem fully committed to the casting and the quality of the challenges and the whole look and feel of it. Like there's no break in immersion from it, and except for those fourth wall moments where they do intentionally break it a little bit more in the last few seasons. And I like that too. I like the sneak peek behind the scenes sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes. Just the combination of all those different elements and the level of quality that they continue to strive to achieve. It's just, I think it's unparalleled for any other contestant competition style show.
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason that it has been on since the 2000, and it's still going. And I don't know when it's going to stop. I hope it doesn't stop. But how are you feeling about the latest season? Are you keeping up with 45?
Oh yeah, I'm loving the longer episodes. I'll always take more Survivor. We usually don't watch them the night of. We watch them the next night. So I'm glad we could record this on a Friday so we could watch it yesterday. So I am caught up, and I'm enjoying it. I feel like it's one of those seasons where I still need to learn a lot about many of the players because we've spent so much time with Lulu.
Yep.
But Survivor still with the longer episodes, they've done a pretty good job of letting me know who these other people are. Some of my favorites right now, I think, for winning potentially are Drew. I think you two mentioned that maybe he reminds you a little bit of who was the older guy who won a few years ago?
Yeah, Gabler.
Gabler. Yeah, reminds me of a younger Gabler. I could definitely see that. I like that comparison. Caleb, I think, is playing a really smart game, maybe too smart. Like he might have too big of a target on him, but we'll see if he can slip by that. I think he has a good chance. And then Dee, I know Dee may have made a little misstep in this last episode, but my perception is that she's a very perceptive person. And I think that can get you pretty far in Survivor when she's noticing things that other people may not see. In fact, even with this past episode where she was noticing that the knot on the bag may have been tied a specific way. I don't know if that was true or not, but that would have never occurred to me. And that spoke to her perception, I think.
Oh yeah. I also love just the, like, if Sean did that intentionally, right? Like the next level strategy of every meticulous thing, which I love to watch.
Yeah, I wonder. I just listened to his exit interview on Rob Sesternino's podcast. He didn't mention that, but I'd be curious if he has an answer about that. Do you happen to know? Was that on purpose?
No. Not that I'm aware. Maybe we'll get to ask him one day. But I love those like small little things where people are just thinking the next level.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Jamey, one question I have for you: would you ever apply to Survivor? Would you go out on Survivor? If so, do you have a strategy? How do you think you would fare out there on the island?
Yeah, I love fantasizing about that, but I get migraine headaches if I don't sleep and eat on a regular basis. And so I think on day one, maybe day two, I would be in a lot of pain. And so knowing that about myself, that this is maybe apropos for this season, knowing that about myself, I would not want to ever take someone else's position from the show because I would be miserable out there for that reason. Maybe if for some way my body evolved out of that and that wouldn't be a problem, I would, yeah, absolutely. I would love to go on there. I'd love to see, and honestly, I'd love to see any game designer or game publisher go on the show. I know there are a few who have applied to it, but it would be fascinating to see their like inside perspective on the game while they're actually playing the game. I don't think I would be a great survivor. I think I would be too weak, too much in pain from the headaches. But I love to think about it anyway. What I would do in those situations. Have you two applied? I'm sure you. No.
I've been applying since 2018.
Okay.
And we both have been to an open casting call or two.
Oh, cool.
Though Alex has a really interesting pitch for Survivor to cast him. You want to share what that was, Alex?
Yeah, it didn't go well. We had about 60 seconds in front of the camera to give our pitch, and so I thought we'd only have about 30 seconds, and I was going to play like a reverse psychology of here's all the reasons you shouldn't put me on the show, but you should anyway. But I'm like 60 seconds. Let me talk a little bit about myself, my job, and then move into the reverse psychology. The person behind the camera gave me like a 10-second, kind of closing out signal, and I said, "Don't put me on the show because I hate snakes, but I won't quit." And then it cut off. And I looked at the person behind the camera, and she started laughing, and I said, "That wasn't very good, was it?" She said, "No." So surprisingly, they haven't called me back, but maybe one day.
That's awesome.
But maybe one day. That does actually, I would also love to see a board game designer out there, or just a creator.
Yeah.
Do you think if a future board game designer was on the show, should they tell people that they are a board game designer?
Probably not. No,
Probably
they're
not.
probably better off going with like entrepreneur or something more generic.
Yeah.
Like the contestant this season who's hiding the fact that she's a lawyer. I think sometimes people overestimate how much people read into those names, but and maybe there has been a board game designer on the show and I haven't realized it, and they just hit it a little bit better.
Yeah.
What do you think? When people hide that sort of thing, is it over the top, or sometimes do you think it's helpful?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We've actually had a couple conversations about that with so many lawyers talking about whether or not they should tell people this season. I do think it does matter because people have preconceived notions of what that is. And so for the lawyers, it makes sense. I also wonder sometimes, hey, if you can't draw on something that you've done previously. I think last season we saw a surgeon or a doctor lie about being a physical therapist or whatever.
Yeah.
And he just didn't play it off very well. And so if you don't have something that you're really familiar with to fall back on, there's no sense in making a lie just a lie.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even with the 26 days now instead of the 39, I feel like people are looking for any excuse to vote you out really early on without getting to know you. So, hey, I'm a board game designer. Immediately you're a threat when it comes to the game. So, but I would align with the board game designer. That's someone I want to work with.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of board games, let's shift into a little bit of a conversation on kind of this overlap between the two, because I see a lot of similarities. Part of what I love about Survivor is the strategy piece about it. And you have designed lots of different board games, Jamey. For those that maybe aren't familiar with your work, could you share just a little bit about your history of board game designing?
Yeah. My first published game, all my games are published by my company. So I'm the lead designer for my company, but we have published games from other designers too. Viticulture is the first one I've designed, then Euphoria, Charterstone, Scythe, Red Rising more recently, along with Expeditions, Smitten too, a little cooperative game. Most of my games are competitive games in the Euro style. Anyone watching, listening who doesn't know what that is, it means games with high levels of agency and usually low levels of player interaction, which is a little bit different, or a lot different than Survivor, where the other players matter quite a bit. I look for tension in my games, but very little conflict. Usually not a lot of negotiation or even trading in my games either. So for that reason, there isn't a lot of overlap between Survivor and my games, but I still look for games with interesting decisions, and I think a lot of the decisions in Survivor are really interesting.
Yeah, and so kind of on that note, as a game designer, as you think about how you look at strategy, what's intriguing to you about the design of Survivor in particular?
Well, yeah, there's so many different mini games within Survivor, and mini games and meta games. Some of the ones that come to mind in particular that I think are fascinating is whenever they give contestants or players a choice between two different options. They've done it the last few seasons in terms of the very first challenge when they get to the beach, where it's either like a brute strength challenge that takes a lot of time, or the What's the name for it? You guys know the name of it.
Yeah, the sweat or savvy.
Sweater Savvy. Yeah. I love that choice. I think that's a great choice to give players. They also, a few seasons ago, right when they were still on the boat, before they even got off the original boat, they gave tribes a choice like that. I can't remember what it was. You guys have a much better memory. Do you remember they had some sort of, I think it was maybe one tribe chose one way and then the other tribes had to choose from the remaining options. Does that sound right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it was David versus Goliath.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. I love those sorts of choices, but I also love when those choices emerge inside the challenge themselves, when there are different paths to victory, I guess, within how the challenge is designed, but it's not as clear of a split choice. They're kind of deciding as they go. Maybe they're strategizing a little bit before they go into it. So a lot of what I'm talking about is the challenges, but I love the design of the challenges. Yeah. Do you have any favorite challenges that come to mind like that, where they have a very clear choice, or maybe teams take very different strategies?
Yeah, I mean, I think I wish we could see a little bit more of behind the scenes strategizing that the tribes get to do prior to those challenges. I don't know if you've ever watched Peridium on YouTube.
Oh, yeah.
He's a content creator for Survivor, but he has some videos on like how people have hacked challenges. And so I really watching, seeing people kind of like this is what the rule said. And this is how I've manipulated it to my advantage. Like the one that comes to mind always for me is in Cook Islands. That's the one with Ozzy's first season with Yule. They're like in this boat and they have to drop these cannonballs down. And there's a target they have to line up with. Or rather than use the target, he just looks through the hole and drops the cannonball in by line of sight. And so it's like, I love that creativity, both in board games and in Survivor. What about you, Alex?
Yeah, I think my favorite types of challenges, and this was really prominent, I think it was in Second Chances, where they would hide idols in challenges to find, because it's kind of that meta game where it's, you put yourself in the shoes of Kelly Wentworth or Jeremy, whoever it is, trying to find that idol, and are they going to get caught? Are they not? The game within the game that's happening there. I think those are my favorite challenges. In addition to, I have a soft spot for the what are they when they're blindfolded and have to put the puzzle together and like get the puzzle pieces and run into each other. That's the humor of Survivor gets me too. So
I love the humor. I suffer through those challenges when I watch, because I don't like to see them get hurt. And I'm sure that's not the part that you get excitement out of, that you enjoy. But whenever there's the potential for a survivor to get hurt, I get anxious. I don't want to see that happen.
Yeah, that's fair.
But it is funny.
Yeah. So thinking of like kind of game mechanics and things like that, have there been any elements of Survivor that have influenced your board game design? Or if so, what kind of elements, would you love to see in a board game at some point?
Well, I love prisoner dilemma style choices. And I've tried to incorporate them into my designs. I don't think I've ever successfully put one in, because like I said, my games aren't particularly interactive with the other players. The one thing that maybe I've started to incorporate, I'm working on a game right now in particular that uses this, is in Survivor, you really have to keep your eyes open at all times. Like in many board games, the art is there for the aesthetic, but not for you to find anything hidden within the art. But Survivor, it's one big game of like seek and find with the idols. You're always looking for a tree that looks weird, or a rock that's out of place. And I love that they encourage that they encourage players to keep their eyes open. So I like games that do that too. I like games where the art is a little bit more than aesthetic, that maybe there's some hints or clues, especially in narrative games, of things that you might be looking for, or things that you could learn from the art.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Jamey, is that, you kind of mentioned your games in particular don't necessarily have a lot of player interaction. I've played a lot of Scythe. It's actually one of my favorite games of all time. And I love sometimes the threat of like conflict is just as important as the actual conflict that happens. And Survivor, as you kind of mentioned, is really all about that social interaction. From like a game design standpoint, why is that maybe something you steer clear from in game design, or maybe less interesting for you for a board game?
Yeah, I really like that question. And you're right. Inside, that is a pretty big feature of the game. Not encouraging combat, but making it adding tension to the game as a result. And when I guess I should say, with player interaction, I love to have tension in games. I love to have reasons to pay attention to the other players without the ability to directly hurt them. And that is pretty comparable to Survivor too. there are, like, you are voting players out, but before then, you're rarely directly hurting another player. I would say there's more in Survivor. There's more positive player interaction, opportunities to lift other players up, to take them along for a reward, or to hand over a goodwill challenge reward to another player. And I love positive player interaction in games. So a lot of our games have that. And like Wingspan, there are a lot of cards that say you gain this, but all other players also gain this. I like those feelings where everyone feels good, and maybe you feel a little bit better based on what you've done.
Yeah, absolutely. In regards to, one of the things that I have been searching for in board games is a game that gives me a feeling of kind of that social strategy of Survivor. And I think of games like Werewolf or Avalon, The Resistance, Secret Hitler. Those games are social strategy games, which are great, but nothing has like found the itch for me that reminds me of Survivor. Have you come across any games that have reminded you of the show?
None that have encompassed all the different elements of the show. I think it's tough to find. Like, Survivor has pulled it off almost magically. They can have that cross section of all those different elements and have them be engaging for the players and for the audience. Like you said, there are a lot of bluffing social deduction games that encompass that one specific part of the show. I think maybe the tough thing about Survivor is that it has player elimination. It's a key part of the game. There are games that can pull off player elimination, but it's pretty rare that I think you can pull that off on the tabletop and provide a good experience for all the players. So I think that's a limiting factor. There are games, there are escape room games with puzzles and things like that. I bet what you could do maybe is find one great game with each of those elements and just have a game night where you play one escape room game, one social deduction game, and then one dexterity game, maybe. And just have that could give you the feel of a game night around Survivor, but not within one single game. I think that's difficult.
Yeah, it's something hard. It's there was a Survivor produced a Survivor party game in for the first season. They actually made a second copy of it for the Australian Outback, which Alex and I both own, and we've had Survivor game nights, and it's hard to get 6 to 8 people to come play, and then I vote one of you out, and you're not playing the rest of the night for an hour or two. So that's hard to kind of have that even experience for everybody. Though Alex and I have had some epic blindsides while playing that game. Unfortunately, I've never won one, but Alex has, and so good for you, Alex. Way to go.
Yeah, appreciate it. No, well, Jamey, a question for you. I think for me, what I love about Survivor and board games is this idea of kind of shared experience, bonding over watching Survivor together, talking about it on the podcast, meeting new people because of it. And even on Survivor, we see, especially in this new era, a lot about kind of stories and how that informs gameplay and things like that. So for you, how does this idea of a shared experience or kind of stories inform your design of board games?
Yeah, those are some of my favorite things about games. I play games because of the other people at the table and the stories that we can create, especially for campaign games where we're telling a story together over multiple games. That's and Survivor is essentially every season is a little campaign game. They're not just playing one game; they're playing potentially 10 different episodes or games. So I love that persistent element of games where something that you may have done 5 games before that might come back and help you or hurt you in the future, and how that adds to the narrative, especially if I can share that narrative with somebody else. So I think it comes to mind the most with those campaign style narrative games. Have you two enjoyed any of those style of games together or separately?
Yeah,
we played the Scythe campaign together.
Nice.
I think we had a group. We stopped right before the end, but Caleb was so far in the lead that there was no chance any of us could even get close to him. So
well, that was a lot of fun. Alex and I also played Gloomhaven together with 2 other friends, and so that kind of, I even think we did that over the course of about 2 years, and it was me, Alex, and 2 other of our friends, and every single week, every Sunday, we went to someone's house and played Gloomhaven, and it's that and even not just campaign games. I think of there are plenty of games that we have with our kind of core group of friends that we've played, and we bring it to the table and say, oh, do you remember that one time that Alex pulled off this move, or that one time that so and so did this? And it's just kind of that shared memory of honestly, it's just joy for me.
Yeah,
And that's, I love games that provide those moments more than anything else.
yeah, I agree. That's why I make games. Our goal is to bring joy to people. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious on this question, if you don't mind me asking. So with
Yeah.
like campaign games, oftentimes the decisions you make early on impacts you mechanically later on in the game. Maybe you've earned something and you get to earn, more income, something that you get to spend later on. And Survivor, that's more like social currency. It's not actual, like basically your past votes don't count against you. And I'm curious if you've ever talked about that on the podcast, if you think that how that would impact Survivor if that was like a tiebreaker or something like that, if past votes count against you for future, have an impact on you in the future.
Yeah, well, it used to impact the future. So in early Survivor, that was the tiebreaker at Tribal
It
Council.
was.
So
Okay,
in
I forgot about that.
Australian Outback, when they merged into one tribe, the one side figured out who had gotten a vote in previous Tribal Council, and so voted for that person in the first tribal because they knew that was the tiebreaker. And I
Wow.
think that is part of the reason they eliminated that.
Uh,
And yeah, I agree though that the social currency, I think we see impact it more often than not. I've liked what they've done this season, in terms of kind of this idea of sacrificing votes. Obviously, we saw it
mhm,
for not work out well for Sabaya. Given her context, it was obviously the wrong decision, but
mhm.
kind of I'm making a decision now that's going to give me an advantage in the future. I think I really enjoy, versus this like I lose a vote just for the sake of losing a vote because I risked something. Yeah, Alex, do you have any thoughts on this question?
Yeah, we talked about it a little bit on the podcast. I don't think we dedicated much time to. I would love to this idea of like almost pre jury moves, and do they
Mhm.
even count? Like if you're
Yeah,
in the final
Right.
three, there's so much game in between the first few tribal councils and the very end. Will that even matter? And so I
Yeah.
think this season with Emily kind of saving Caleb last episode or last week's episode when Sabaya went home, is that
Mhm.
something that she can use in a final tribal council pitch? Or is it
Yeah.
like there's so much game that happens in between that? Really, that is just to get you to the merge, and then it's a brand new game. So I think it's so interesting. And again, it's 26 days now. It used to be 39. We also
Mhm.
watch and podcast about Australian Survivor, which if you
Mhm.
don't watch that, I highly recommend it. And that's 50 days long. And so
Oh, wow.
really with that, they are the ones that really say, hey, something you do on day 5, it has no impact on your
Uh-huh.
ability to win on day 50.
yeah.
So I find that aspect really interesting of at, at what point do the scales tip where your moves are now helping your chance of winning.
Right.
Yeah.
That is really interesting. Yeah, I am almost so often I'm amazed in the tribal councils, the final tribal council, where they don't bring up something that happened really early on. And you're right, maybe it just doesn't, it's so far off their memories at that point that it's not worth bringing up. Or maybe it's edited out. I don't know.
That's it.
Probably a little bit of both.
Yeah, yeah.
I do think some of the Survivor players we've talked with have really shared that, hey, pre-merge stuff, like that's great. I'm glad it got you
Mhm.
to the merge, but it doesn't really count as much as something that happened at the end of the game. So
That makes sense. Yeah.
yeah, Jamie. Well, I just want to thank you for being here and wrap up our kind of our time together. And if is there anything that you would like to promote or share with our listeners about anything that's going on in your area of the world?
I appreciate you asking about that. Yeah, I was just here to talk about Survivor, but we do have a new game. We have a new game called Apiary that's coming out soon. And Apiary is full of positive player interaction. So if people like that aspect of Survivor, they might enjoy this game about space bees that we are just shipping to early customers right now. But yeah, mostly I just wanted to geek out about Survivor. Thank you guys for the opportunity to do this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we are very thankful for you being on the episode. Thankful for what you do for the world of board games as well. And
Thank you.
hopefully, our listeners will get a kick out of seeing their two loves merge into one. So, thank you again for being on. And if you're listening now, we'll speak Llama to you later.